Welcome back to the county seat. We are continuing our conversation talking about the importance of a direct connection, a relationship between local government and Washington, both the elected officials and the administration. Joining us for our conversation part of the show is a commissioner from Sevier County here in the town of Richfield, Tooter, Ogden. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us.
Good to be here.
And Russ, Cowley, who is the executive director of the 6th County Association of Governments down here. So we appreciate your taking the time for this conversation. I would like to talk about the tools in the toolbox for the counties to have a direct connection with Washington. I know several counties chip in to hire a lobbyist that serves in Washington to try and keep pushing local county issues. But there are also a lot of other tools, associations you belong to. Could you kind of give us a rundown of that?
Well, I'll start out, Chad. One of the things that we've been involved with is going back to Washington and actually taking our commissioners and our board members back to Washington to have them actually sit down with our congressional members, talk about the issues that are important to them. One of the things that happened with me long ago is that as we went back to that Washington trip, there's an organization that we belong to called the National Association of Development Organizations. It's kind of a partner with the National Association of Counties, but it's for executive directors to understand more about how to deal with Washington and work with our programs. And as we have gone back to that organization and had the opportunity to actually go out and work with those folks on how bills are written and even get involved with the writing of bills. And so it's been very, very nice to be able to have the support of county commissioners that will allow us as their employees to go back and actually become educated on those kind of issues.
So I know often when the county commissioners get together at a Utah Association of Counties function, there are staffers that show up almost all the time. You can count that there'll be, a Ryan Wilcox or some of the different people from the senators and legislators' office. Is it different, Tooter, when you go back to Washington and you're sitting in that environment to talk to them about issues?
Yes, obviously you have that connection with your staffers here on the local area with the AOGs, but also when you go back there, you have that opportunity to have the opportunity to meet with your senators and your representatives back there on a one-on-one basis, and that has a lot of impact, especially when, Chad, you have such a coalition of people from Utah that have such strong, I don't know, we have a strong desire in Utah to be represented, and Utah is very well represented in NACO and also in the WIR. And so it does play a very crucial part in getting your voice heard in Washington. So
you just mentioned two organizations, one a subset of the other. You've got the Western Intermountain region of the National Association of Counties, WIR and NACO. How do they help interface in this whole Washington mess? Because apparently your visits when you go on these NACO Washington junkets are not necessarily just to our elected delegations. You meet with all kinds of people.
Yes, you do. You'll meet with people, obviously with WIR, that is the Western regional side of the United States. And we have a lot more in common with the Western states. So when we have that convention, you are able to meet with your other elected officials and those who are representatives of us in that board, and try to get a unified voice when you go to NACO, which is the whole United States. Mm-hmm. And then at that time, you're able to go forward and at that time make legislation that hopefully will have some power, because now you're unified with the Western states and also with NACO going forward when you're back making rules.
So have those associations been able to open some administrative doors as well as legislative? I know the bill making process is very messy, much more messy than at the county level. But have they made an impact as far as working with the Department of Interior, the EPA, and groups like that? Does that connection help?
It definitely helps. And one thing that I may say for our 6 County Association of Governments, our board has always been very supportive of sending folks back to Washington. And I have been very amazed at how important it is for a county commissioner to actually have that experience of going back to Washington. And as Commissioner Ogden says, actually sitting down with a member and talking about their issues and their concerns. It means a lot to them. And I might just mention also that as we go through the process, we have the congressional members, staff come to our meetings. They have that networking with those folks every month. And then as we go back to Washington, they're very good to help us with any issues we have as we go back to meet with the member themselves.
Do you ever find that your trips are necessary to actually meet outside of our own delegation? Do you ever pop in and talk to an Ohio senator or something like that? Just, does that opportunity ever happen to let them know what's happening out here?
Yes, that's always something that you want to try to do. A lot of times when you're meeting with your own representatives, we're kind of playing the same tune to them. They understand what our issues are, so it's always good if we can get into see somebody that has struggles with what we really are looking for out here in the West.
Do you think you've turned any heads? I mean, do you think there have been guys in Tennessee or North Carolina that all of a sudden start to understand Western issues because of the efforts of NACO and WIR and your junkets back to Washington?
What's fascinating about that is if you go back and you get involved with some of those organizations, and as I mentioned with the NATO organization, I was able to be on the board and a few of those things. And what was funny about it is I would go back and they knew I was from Utah. And the first thing that they would always say to me is that they'd say, "Okay, Mr. Cowley, tell us about public lands," because I was always bringing up the public lands issue of this area. And so we've actually had the opportunity of bringing those folks back here on this congressional briefing, and it's been very interesting to get their reaction. It's something they haven't ever seen before. They don't understand public lands, and as you start explaining that to them and actually give them an on-the-ground experience, it's funny to watch their demeanor change. And so it's a great opportunity.
Is that something you think we need to do more of, is actually getting them from Washington out here so they can see it firsthand? Is there something lost in the translation of you telling them about the problem and them seeing it?
Yeah, very much so. We're trying to be managed by people in Washington that's 2,000 miles away, and a lot of these folks have never even been out here on the federal lands. As you know, Chad, obviously we're about 76% federal lands, and a lot of these people in the East, they don't understand that at all because they have very little federal land or very little input on their federal land. So we're trying, and we continue to try to get more involved with the people in the East. That's one thing with NACO. Go back there and you try to get with some of these folks, the other commissioners from the East, try to explain to them what our concerns and what our issues are. We try to get onto these committees and so that we can make an impact, try to get them to understand what's going on here in the West.
In recent weeks, I think it was just like last week, there was an article in the local paper about the BLM headquarters for the entire nation possibly moving to Ogden, not to your house, Tooter, but I mean to the city of Ogden. Just to be clear, clarity is really important. How would that affect things for policy? Do you think that would really have an impact?
I think it'd be a great thing. If they're going to be out, if they're trying to manage the land, and most of the land that they're trying to manage is in the West, they certainly ought to have their office in the West. It just makes sense that they ought to be out here looking at the issues and being involved here, not in Washington, D.C.
Would that make access to? Would that solve some of your problems as a 6-county AG? I mean, I know sometimes you go to the Department of Interior for grants and things like that for your counties. In fact, I'd like to spend just a little bit of this time talking about that part of the relationship. in the fact that because of the, we've got PILT issues, we've got grants, we've got things like that. What is that part of that connection with Washington directly with counties?
Well, if we're not fighting for the rights of our area, nobody else is. Mm-hmm. And so what we've been talking about is building those relationships, and to have that office closer to actually where the lands are would make that a lot easier for the commissioners. I mean, how many trips do you guys go on back, to Washington just to present an idea, or to have to go back and represent one of their proposals for one of their public land issues? And if it was in or here in Utah, they wouldn't have to drive that far, and this is where it's all taking place anyway. I
guess a Wyoming rancher wouldn't have that much trouble getting there to a hearing or anything like that.
No,
be a little easier.
But what's really interesting about what you're talking about is you take PILT and SRS, you take that funding source away from the counties, and we have counties that would probably go bankrupt. And you think about some of those counties that have 97% public, lands. That's very difficult for them to make up a difference of PILT.
Is that money, Tooter, that is direct money, direct from the federal government to the county? It's not like filtered through a state or a region?
No,
or anything like
it
that.
comes right directly to the county. We get about $1,900,000 a year. Obviously, if that translates into acres dollar-wise, it's about $1.80 per acre for Sevier County. Which is minimal for all of the work that we have to do out there. We have search and rescue that has to, go out and help assist people when they have accidents or problems on the federal land. It's important that we have that. There's 49 states in the United States that receive some sort of a PILT payment, and that's payment in lieu of taxes. Obviously, we continue to battle that, because a lot of these counties, like Russ has mentioned, they rely heavily on that. We put that into our budget every year, and then we have to ask Washington, to
live up to the commitment.
Live up to the commitment of that PILT payment.
So is that $1.80 a lot less than Joel Hatch would, or Jensen, or what it was, that she would pay for an acre of rangeland that she owns outright?
Sure. Your green belt is about $1.50 an acre. If we could even get the government to come up to pay $1.50 an acre, that would be substantial for all of these counties. What we'd really like to see is go back to management of the forests. That's what was originally taking place before the PILT was introduced, is they had to make their forests pay their way. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the logging, it goes back to the grazing, it goes back to managing the forest and going forward. So,
well, there's some headway that should and can be made in that particular area. I kind of want to finish up this conversation by talking about we've gotten pretty good with some of the events that you hold of actually getting our local delegation out there. Do we need to get guys from South Carolina out here on the ground?
Yes.
And how do we do? And how do you think? How are you going to bribe them to get here?
Feed them a big beef steak.
Well, that's one thing that's been fascinating about our congressional ride. A lot of people go out and they bring folks out and they'll put them on a golf course. We put them on ATVs, and it's been amazing when we've tried to encourage folks from back east to come out here, that ATV ride is something that really intrigues them. And so we have been successful in bringing some staff from other organizations, other congressional members on the Democratic side, for example. We tell them we're not going to convert them to be a Republican. We just want them to see what public lands is really about. And we'll give you an ATV ride, and that encourages them to come out. And we can talk more about that little experience. But no, it's been really good that way. And I think if we can continue to encourage that kind of activity and have something to bring folks out that's attractive, that I think we can bring people out here, and that's what we're working towards more all the time.
Well, this has been most enlightening, and in case people are wondering what this congressional right is all about that the 6 counties has been engaged in, we're going to tag along, and we're going to do that when we come back on the county seat.